Gospel. All right. What's the therapeutic gospel and how has it crept into the church?
Well, the therapeutic gospel takes what the Bible teaches about our fall into sin and tweaks that and drifts from that and makes it, it's a classic case of confusing a symptom with a root cause. You know, if you go to a doctor and you've got a problem, let's say you've got a bad cough or something, you know, you go to a doctor and a good doctor is going to give you some sort of medicine to cure the symptoms or at least to help you through the symptoms. But a really good doctor is going to go beyond just treating the symptoms and is also going to look for the root cause of your problem and then make a diagnosis and then offer some treatment. And what happens with a therapeutic gospel is that we stay superficial on what the big problem is. So, you know, people will come to church or they'll come to a pastor or they'll read the Bible and they'll say, you know, my big problem is a broken marriage or broken relationship, or I have low self-esteem, or I've got an addiction problem, or I've got anger issues. And, you know, they'll have these different symptoms of a problem. And what happens is a lot of times we can take those symptoms and treat them on the surface and just treat the symptoms rather than going deeper into what the scriptures say is actually the fundamental problem that we have, which is sin, which is idolatry, which is actually our rebellion against God. And that rebellion, that sin, that idolatry is what is actually causing all of these symptoms. So a therapeutic gospel sort of reduces the idea of sin until it gets confused with the problem. So, you know, someone will come in and say, you know, I've got a problem, I feel guilty. Can you help me not feel guilty? Well, the scriptures address guilt not because we feel guilty. The big problem isn't that we feel guilty. The big problem is that we are guilty. So the scriptures come in and the gospel actually addresses a fundamental problem that sin causes, not just the symptoms that sin causes. Some people will go to an extreme where they won't want to deal with symptoms at all. Mm-hmm. I want to say, no, start with the symptoms. Start with where that person is feeling the need and the weight of the problems that their sin has caused. So, of course, begin there. But then as you begin to go deeper, as you begin to open up the scriptures, as you begin to speak about the gospel, you've got to be able to take them deeper into what the Bible actually says is the fundamental issue. Because what happens is if we only treat symptoms and we stay sort of on the superficial level, what eventually will happen is that's only going to be good for so long. Mm-hmm. That's not going to bring lasting change. They might get some temporary relief, but it's like a doctor who treats the cough without ever going to see out what might be actually causing the cough or treating the symptoms rather than a disease. We want the gospel to actually take this heart of stone that we have and for God to replace that with a heart of flesh. We're not empty people needing God to fill us up. We're people that are filled with all sorts of cancerous, sinful desires. We need God to root out of us and replace, give us a heart transplant. And that's what the gospel does.
Mm-hmm. Is man basically good or basically evil?
Man is basically evil.
Okay. So we have to share that or we don't understand our need for redemption.
We've got to go to the root cause, and that's what makes the gospel all the more glorious. Because the gospel isn't just God coming alongside of us saying, you know, you're okay, but here I'll help you to be better. The gospel is about God loving us in spite of our sin, sending His Son to die for us when we did nothing to deserve His grace and this magnificent salvation that He's offering to us, and for Him to love us enough in spite of our sin that He would send His Son to die on the cross for us. That's the message that overwhelms the heart, that captivates us, and then that actually leads to life change that goes beyond just the symptoms.
Now, with this therapeutic gospel, I mean, I know a lot of us, including myself, we've used it to help people through situations. When you approach somebody, you know, that maybe uses this technique, how do they respond to you?
Well, I try to not lessen the offense of what the Bible teaches, because I find that most people want a true diagnosis. And I know, and most people too that I talk to that have certain symptoms and issues that they're dealing with, they want someone to go deeper into what the big problem is. Mm-hmm. And so you want to start with the symptoms and with the felt needs that the person has, but then you want to go deeper into what the Bible teaches so that you can then offer the gospel in all of its glory, so that the gospel addresses the fundamental disease, but then also addresses the symptoms. And so rather than just stay at the superficial level, I want to go beyond therapy to the gospel that actually transforms us from now until eternity. sometimes when people are going through difficult times, that's God's way of beginning to work in their hearts to bring them to where they recognize their need. But ultimately, the gospel isn't about God making bad people better or good people better. It's actually about God making dead people alive. That's what the gospel does. It enlivens our heart. It makes us new creations.